This is Chris Wilson. I'm part of the Security Industry Association's Proptech Advisory Board. In this video, we're going to talk a little bit about the fundamentals of access control as it relates to the Proptech and commercial real estate community. When we think about access control, this is one element of the entire security program. And when we think about that element, there's various pieces that would be relevant. So we want to lock certain exits and the areas of the facility by the schedule so that people may not need to access those at all times a day, and we want to access those only when it's appropriate, so we can control them by schedules. Each individual user will be assigned a card or some sort of a credential, maybe that's a mobile credential or a key fob, and whether that's an employee, a contractor, if it's in a multi-tenant or resident, so that we get that traceability for each individual user. In addition, instead of having to modify permissions for multiple users, we could quickly void one credential from that single user should there be some sort of a problem, a resident move out, a tenant change, etc., and it doesn't disturb other people within the facility. As I mentioned, each individual person has a unique credential. We can now audit the movement of that individual. If they're being denied access at a particular door, maybe it's outside the schedule, but we know exactly who that person is and where they're being moved around the facility. And then last, we also get special conditions around like a fire alarm, that there's some sort of a concern in the building that we need to notify and be able to control access to allow people to exit. Or maybe there's some sort of an incident outside the building that needs to perform a lockdown to control people to have them remain in the building for various reasons. So an access control system is a key part of that. Ultimately, it's all about the accountability of people and assets around the facility. So let's drill this down. What is access control? Ultimately, at its best definition, it is a process of controlling who goes where and when in a particular building or area. So let's look at an analogy of how these systems work. So we'll use a real world example. So we've got a visitor who's going to come to a security guard. There's some sort of a tenant or occupant, and then there's a doorman that's going to let them into the facility. So let's take a look at how this would work with access control. In access control, we have some sort of an RFID or mobile credential that's presented to some sort of a reader that's typically mounted next to the door. That reader goes back to a door control panel, which then is also wired into the door hardware. So here's some examples of what those pieces of hardware would look like. So oftentimes you'll be familiar, if you've got a commercial property, with what these RFID readers look like. You've obviously seen these credentials and badges. They could be a variety of different styles. You may not have seen these control panels. They're often in a closet tucked away somewhere, but there is this door hardware. This is one example of a door strike that would be mounted at the door itself to be able to control it. So let's walk through the flow. So the RFID reader says, "Hi, who are you?" and asking the credential to present itself. The RFID credential, again, could be RFID or a mobile credential. It recognizes that the reader is asking to present itself, and it says, "Hi, my name is Alberto." The reader then accepts that information and lets the control panel know that Alberto has arrived. The control panel goes through its memory and understands Alberto is here, and goes through its memory and says, I know Alberto. He's been involved in the system. He's been enrolled in the system before, and we know who that person is. It then can tell the door hardware, go ahead and unlock and allow Alberto to enter. The door hardware unlocks, and now Alberto is able to walk into the facility. So again, we'll take a look at the hardware that's included. So our credential, our reader, the control panel, and the door hardware. The reader sends out the query to say, is there a credential present? The credential says, yes, I'm here. This is my number. So again, instead of a name of Alberto, it's going to have some sort of a numeric value most of the time and say, this is who I am. The reader will then send that information back to the control panel, at which point the control panel says, do I know this person? Do they have access? Assuming so, they'll send the information to the door hardware, at which point the door will actually open. Now this happens very, very quickly, but this is what's happening each time a door gets opened or is allowed for access. So we've talked about some of these different components in the system. Let's take a high-level look at some of the topologies of how these can work. So the first method is daisy chain. Oftentimes there's a computer that's in the property manager's office or a server in a server closet that's connected to the network that connects to the first controller in the line. Then that controller can then communicate down the line to other controllers which talk to the various peripherals at the door. So this is what we call a daisy chain configuration. The next would be a network configuration. So very similar. We have a computer in the property manager's office or a server room that's connected to the network. And then each one of the controllers in our network environment is individually controlled to the network and can be directly communicated. And then last, we have a hybrid environment where some of the controllers are on the network, and then from this one here in the center, you can see there's two others that are on a daisy chain. So again, understanding this, particularly in a commercial real estate environment, as you're understanding how the network is going to be laid out, if you need to coordinate with an IT department, understanding some of these topologies can certainly be helpful. So the next piece that we'll talk about is about doors and the locking hardware that are associated with those. So there's a variety of doors that exist inside of a facility, but there's a couple of key names that would be important to understand. For the purposes of this video, we won't go into a ton of details about each one of these, but understand that these three door types require some sort of special treatment and will need to be understood with the AHJ, the authority having jurisdiction. That could be your fire marshal or a local code entity. And oftentimes you'll have a manufacturer or a security integrator involved to help navigate this conversation. So the first one is fire doors. So these are certified doors that cannot be cut or modified without special limitations, and they're designed to limit risk to during a fire condition inside the facility. The next one is stairwell doors. It's exactly what you would expect. These are doors leading to and from stairwells. And during an egress or during an emergency, they need to have special control. They often need to release, but there's various things around positive latching and things that need to be considered. So just be mindful if it's a multi-story and there's stairwells involved, those doors may need special treatment. And then last, delayed egress. We often see these in healthcare and those types of facilities that may need some sort of special treatment depending on the use case. So again, if you're in a commercial real estate property that has some of these like nursing home type environments, you may hear the term of delayed egress, simply meaning you would do an action at the door and in a few moments, some sort of a time period, the door would then unlock after a short time period. So just be aware of those if you hear the term. Another term that will often come up is fail secure versus fail safe locking hardware. So the biggest difference here is fail safe when the power gets interrupted. So the power lost to the building, the locking device is released. So the best example is a mag lock. So if you have a power loss, a catastrophic failure of some sort, the lock will become released and the door would be open. Versus fail secure. So when power is interrupted, the locking device would remain locked. So depending on the scenario, there's various reasons why you may want one of these. The most common that we hear is, in a commercial real estate property, most of the time the front door is preferred to be fail secure. In the event of an unoccupied building and the power is lost, the building would remain secure. You could use a key override to be able to get access. So again, there's certain codes that would dictate that, but note that there's a difference between a fail secure and a fail safe lock. The one key that's always important is being able to have free egress. So when there's some sort of an emergency, people need to be able to exit the facility, egress or exit out. There's often, again, these mechanical overrides for fail secure hardware that I just mentioned. But just keep in mind, one of the key reasons for mechanical or for access control is to remove mechanical keys, as those have no traceability or audit history or things like that. So when we look at doors in particular, there's a variety of pieces that are important to understand. The doors themselves are often called the door leaves, to be able to understand those are the door slabs, door leaves, to understand those are the pieces that move. The actual frame is the piece around the door, and then the mullion or teastrical is the vertical center down the top. Some people will refer to that edge as the frame as a mullion, so just be aware of that. I've heard that referred to a couple of times as a mullion as opposed to the frame. Talk a little bit about mag locks in our fail safe section. There's various pieces that come together to form a mag lock. We understand as a commercial property owner, you're probably not going to install these, but understand that there's a variety of different types of mag locks and how these two pieces come together, that armature and magnet. As those come together, they need to be able to bond closely and align to be able to do that. So mag locks exist in two different ways. They can either be shear, where they can have a vertical pull, or a traditional pull style action. So again, as you look through mag locks, we're looking at locking hardware for a particular property. I know there's a couple of different options there to be able to use. More commonly, we see these door strikes. Again, these are mounted inside the frame. The cylindrical or mortise latch would have the latch that would go inside this keeper area to be able to capture that and hold it secure. And then that flap there that has the arrows is what will release to actually allow that locking hardware to come out. So the lock, the handle set, is in a locked state, and the keeper moves out of the way to allow that to come out. So again, very common to see these fail secure door strikes used in the commercial office space for various reasons. So just understand there's a variety of different pieces, and the alignment is, again, very similar to maglock, super important to make sure those work correctly. So when we look at the door, there's other peripheral devices that get installed around the door to complete the system and make everything function. So the first one is the request to exit. So as a occupant of the building, as I approach the door, I'm going to need to be exiting. It needs to be notified that there's somebody there and they need to get out. So the most common is some sort of a motion detector. It sees the person, just sees their movement, and allows the door to unlock or at least trigger the system to say that somebody's leaving. Many jurisdictions will require a push button, particularly if they have a maglock as an override option. To be able to do that, again, this would require somebody to take an action of reaching over to press it, but you've all seen these around the different facilities. So oftentimes with maglocks or fail-safe devices, these are required as a backup. We also have some scenarios where things like pressure pads, so once you physically would step on top, those could make sense to be used and be able to do exit. Another thing to keep in mind is that oftentimes with access control, we come across these challenges where the door is not closed fully. Well, the door has to be closed fully to be able to lock, and so door closures become super important, not only to be installed, but installed properly on the door. And so having a door closer on a door that's going to be part of an access control system can be very key, so that the door, you're insured or reasonably insured that the door is locked behind when somebody exits. So here's a couple of examples of how door closures can look. Very similar. They're just some sort of a pressure, hydraulic or spring-loaded pressure to pull that door back to a closed position once someone goes through and, again, holds that door closed. Credentials and readers. So this is a key important part of the access control system. You'll often see this is the most visible part, is this is what you're carrying from a credential, or the reader mounted at the door. Just taking a quick look, there's a variety of different types of credentials, including mobile credentials where you can use your phone. These are different form factors of credentials that can be printable for visual identification of a badge, what we call clamshell cards or a key fob, some sort of a sticker or token, or even these smart card embedded chips. All of those also will have various technologies inside the device that can change. So just know that there's quite a few different options here, and being sure to select the right credentials will have a direct impact on the system. Similarly, making sure you select the right reader to go with that. So what type of credential have you selected? Where is it going to be mounted within the facility, and what is the read range that's necessary? So I mentioned earlier about controllers and the power for those. Keep in mind, oftentimes in these systems, the controller is what's actually making the decision. So if something's not working correctly, it's often something in that controller that's doing it. So, the computer there is just for configuration and reporting information. It's then sent over to the controller where things are housed locally. Sometimes that computer is actually at the cloud-based system, then sent down into the controller locally. When the action's taken at the door, so a reader is there and a credential gets presented, it's sent back to the controller. The controller makes the decision and unlocks the door, as you saw earlier in that analogy, but then the controller then notifies the software. So the controller is actually making a lot of those decisions. Just an important factor as you go forward. We often say the controller is the brains of the system, and very similar, there's a ton of different devices and things that can be connected and wired into these. So just know that there's a lot of different varieties. This is one example in all the different inputs and outputs that can be associated. When it comes to selecting a controller, there's a variety of different units. You want to make sure that you're considering compatibility, especially if you have multiple properties in the commercial real estate space. Is the controller that's being used at this new property compatible with existing software if you have that? Know that there's wireless controllers, wireless door handles, and wireless locks that could be compatible with. or even these hybrid units that could be used to have a controller built into the reader. And again, pros and cons to each of those, but just know that there's a variety of different options available in today's market. So again, quick recap on access control. Again, we talked a little about the overview of the system. So it's about who goes where and when. It's not just about keeping the bad people out. It's about letting the right people in and making that a seamless experience for them. And so selecting controllers and readers and credentials that are appropriate can go a long way. There's a variety of different topologies and different hardware pieces that are necessary as part of these systems. So again, just wanted to share a little bit about kind of what these components are, some of the terminology that's often used to help educate and share that with the commercial real estate space as you're, embarking on new properties or taking over existing properties, just having a better understanding of what these systems do and the components that are involved. So again, thank you for this. If you want to learn more about our Proptech advisory board and how the Security Industry Association is really working to advance the collaboration between the Proptech community and the physical security community, please reach out to us. We'd love to have you involved. And thanks for watching.